Okay, good morning. We are reading God King, a story in the days of King Hezekiah, and we're on chapter 5. This chapter is called God and Goddess. Let's get started. Taharka rose to his feet and covered his emotion by falling into the great house formalities that he had been so carefully taught. He inclined his head ceremoniously, as was due to the priestess of Ammon. Then he replied in the manner prescribed, "The god is indeed hungry." Shepnuset turned to the door and clapped her hands. "It will be a minute," she said. She drew closer, looking him over in wonder. "The god has grown tall," she said at last. "So has the lady." The hands that Shepnu extended to his were warm and eager. They both were suddenly shy, but Shepnu couldn't be repressed for long. Her eyes glinted. Will the god not give the lady the kiss of greeting? Taharka felt his face grow hot. The lady knows that takes place before the people on the morrow. Indeed, the god is surprised to see the lady before then. Thebes is not Napata. The lady goes where she likes. He believed her. He felt sorry for those who had to keep her in check. So the lady does not hate Egypt anymore. What of the poppy smoke? Shepnu had tired of the game. I've never breathed it. You think I'm a fool. I pretend, and they don't dare do anything about it, and... She began to giggle. The high priest of Hammon? He asked me what Ammon required to remove the curse from his vineyards in the delta. I told him he must dress up in his wife's clothes and perform the priestess harvest dance in front of the people. She smiled wickedly. And he did it. Taharka's eyes widened. Then he realized that, instead of shuddering in horror, he wanted to laugh. He thought of the pompous high priest and actually did chuckle. A platter of food was brought into the chamber. The servants crept out, heads down. Taharka looked at the contents of the meal in disbelief. Fish? Fish roe? For me? You know it's forbidden. I have friends, she said. They get things for me. And some of the priests turned their backs. Taharka drew himself up. He had dared the gods enough for one day. A ring of authority entered his voice. The god is not pleased. Take it away. Shepnu shrugged and ordered something else. As he ate, she drew up a stool and talked. There were stories of her pranks and misdeeds, but he noticed that as with him, the bright spots were only spots. Most of her life was unpleasant routine. In a moment of silence, he looked at her and said, "The god is indeed happy to see his lady. You were missed in Napata." Shepnu smiled, but then her lips grew hard. "I will always be missed in Napata." "What do you mean? We will always..." He stopped, because of course, they would not always be together. The custom, the god in Napata, the priestess in Thebes, sacred wife and god husband, but never together. "It was his fault," said Shepnu. "Pianki." Pianki? Taharka was puzzled. What did his half-brother Pianki have to do with it? Pianki the Great. That Pianki, the first of our line, the Great. He was so great because he left his wife here in Thebes to rule as priestess so he could go back to Napata and keep on being the god. She was so great, they never changed the custom. It's their fault. Taharka thought about this, about those strong women who, since the days of Pianka, had ruled in Thebes like the old, all-powerful African queens in the stories. He thought about Shepnu and how she was now one of them. Little Shepnu. Could she do it? She had always been stubborn, tough, and now she had changed. She was grown up. So was he. Had he changed? Not much, he thought. He still thought of himself as the captive child god, the prisoner in the great house, not as a man or a king. You don't know how to be the god, Shabata had said. Well, he had tried. He had failed today before the Holy of Holies, but if Shepnu could do these things, he could still try. He put down his bowl and said, "The customs stand, O lady, but two of us are stronger than one." She nodded. Her movement caused her braids to swing. The little braids reminded Taharka of the ones he had pulled years before. "Do you remember?" he began, and suddenly they went back to being children again, recalling the old days in Napata, the games in the children's court, laughing at the old jokes. "Remember Shabbataka? Remember the time he put the snake in the sun priest's chalice?" "I never liked Shabbataka," said Shepnu. In the middle of one of Shepnu's story, something about a way she had found to get into the Holy of Holies and how one of these days she was going to do it, the God King fell asleep. Shepnu stood looking down at the tall, tired boy. The laughter in her eyes had died away. They were grave and brooding, like the eyes of a mother. She half turned to the door to call for a servant, but changed her mind. She draped his arm over her shoulder and walked him, still sound asleep, to the alcove where he collapsed and rolled over onto the great bed. Before she left, she bent down and kissed him. That is the end of God King, Chapter 5.